Have you ever felt completely invisible, like you stopped mattering to the world? The concrete was cold. Frank Delgado knew this corner like a man knows his own shadow. Every crack in the sidewalk, every stain, every cigarette butt that rolled past in the Cleveland wind. He'd been sleeping here for 9 years, long enough that the pavement had memorized the shape of his body. 58 years old, ex-construction worker, ex-husband, ex-human being. That's how he thought of himself now. Ex. Past tense. A man who used to exist. He built houses once. Strong hands, steady rhythm, pride in every brick laid straight. But then the economy collapsed. The bottle opened, and his life fell apart in sequence. Job, wife, home, dignity. Each loss stacked on the previous like demolition in reverse. The worst part wasn't hunger. The worst part was how people looked through him. Like he was air, like he was already gone. So Frank learned to cooperate with his own erasure. He stopped making eye contact, stopped using mirrors, stopped remembering that Frank meant something once. When someone threw a coin, he muttered thanks to the pavement. When someone handed him food, he ate alone in the alley, back turned to the street. Every morning, the same thought. I'm just what's left. Not a person, just debris. The winter morning was particularly brutal. Wind slicing through his 3 layers of jackets, snow melting into his boots. Frank huddled against the brick wall of Sweet Haven Bakery, where the smell of fresh bread mocked him daily. Warm, golden, impossible. He knew this bakery well. Decades ago, he'd built the original counter inside. His hands had laid those foundation stones. But that was another Frank. A ghost, Frank. This Frank was just the trash that collected near the door. Then something impossible happened. Someone called his name. "Good morning, Mr. Frank. Would you like some coffee?" The voice came from above, from the doorway, and it used his name. Not, "Hey, buddy," or "Sir," or the silent nothing most people gave him. Mr. Frank, like he was someone. He looked up slowly, confused, into the face of Margaret Lane. 62, gray hair pulled back tight, flour on her apron, eyes that didn't flinch away. The bakery owner. I don't have money," Frank managed, voice rusty. "Did I ask for money?" Margaret said simply. "I asked if you wanted coffee." Frank's mind stumbled. This had to be pity. Charity. The thing he'd learned to half accept, half hate. "You built this counter," Margaret continued, nodding toward the bakery. 30 years ago. My father hired you. I remember. You did beautiful work." Frank stared. Someone remembered him. I'm not." The words wouldn't come. Margaret just smiled, not with sadness, not with pity, just acknowledgement. "Coffee's on the trash bin lid when you're ready. No strings." She disappeared back inside. Frank sat frozen. For 9 years, he'd been invisible. A problem to step around. A guilt that people paid to go away. But she'd said his name. And she'd remembered his work. That night, huddled in the doorway of a closed laundromat, Frank couldn't sleep. His mind kept returning to that moment. The simple gift of being seen, not as trash, not as charity case, as Frank. The next morning, the coffee was there again, steam rising in the cold air. And the morning after that, and the morning after that. No sermon, no conditions, just coffee. And his name. "Good morning, Mr. Frank." Each time she said it, something microscopic shifted inside him, like a foundation stone being set. On the 4th day, Frank did something he hadn't done in years. He washed his face. Not in a shelter sink with his eyes closed, Not quick and shameful. He actually washed, in the gas station bathroom with hand soap, scrubbing his neck, behind his ears, like someone who might matter. He looked in the mirror. The face staring back was weathered, scarred, tired, but it was a face, not a ghost. He returned the empty coffee cup to Margaret at the doorway. "Thank you," he said, and this time he looked at her eyes. Margaret paused, surprised, then smiled. "You're welcome, Frank." Not Mr. Frank this time, just Frank. Like they were equals. Over the following days, Frank found himself doing strange things, small things, things that people did when they weren't just surviving. He collected cans and bottles from the gutters, traded them for a razor blade and a bar of soap at the corner store. He shaved. Badly. Cut himself twice. But he shaved. He started arriving at the bakery corner earlier, before Margaret opened, and swept the cigarette butts away from her door. Not because she asked, not for payment, but because someone who remembered his name deserved a clean doorway. One morning, Margaret came out earlier than usual and caught him sweeping. "Frank?" He froze, embarrassed, broom in hand like a child caught stealing cookies. The door was dirty, and you didn't have to do that." "I know. I wanted to." Margaret studied him. Then something shifted in her expression. "I've got heavy flour bags coming in today. My back's not what it used to be. You interested in earning that coffee?" Frank's heart jumped. Earning. Not receiving. Not begging. Earning. "Yes," he heard himself say. "Yes, ma'am." For 3 weeks, Frank helped with deliveries, loading, unloading, organizing. He worked in silence, efficiently, like his hands remembered being useful. Margaret paid him in meals and cash, not much, but earned. Every dollar felt different than a handout. Every dollar had his sweat on it. But Margaret noticed something. Every time Frank spoke to her, his eyes dropped. To the floor, to his hands, anywhere but her face. One afternoon, after he'd finished stacking bags in the storage room, Margaret called him to the counter. "Frank, can I ask you something?" He stood awkwardly, shifting weight. "Sure. Why don't you ever look at me when we talk?" The question landed like a punch. Frank felt his face heat. I don't mean to be rude, I'm not saying you're rude," Margaret interrupted gently. "I'm asking why." Silence. Frank's hands twisted together. The old shame rose like bile. I guess I got used to it," he finally said, voice barely audible. "Not looking at people. Easier that way." "Easier for who?" "For everyone. They don't have to see this." He gestured vaguely at himself. "And I don't have to see them, not seeing me." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that would change everything. "Frank, you've been staring at the ground so long, you forgot your head can lift." He looked up sharply, then realized what he'd just done. Met her eyes. Actually, met them. Margaret smiled. "There you are." Frank felt something crack open inside his chest. Something locked tight for years. "I'm nobody," he whispered. I'm just the guy who sleeps on your sidewalk." "No," Margaret said firmly. "You're the man who built my counter 30 years ago. You're the man who sweeps my doorway without being asked. You're the man who carried 60-pound flour bags like they were pillows." She leaned forward. "You're Frank Delgado, and you're still here." Still here. Those 2 words hit harder than any sermon, any charity, any pity. Not, "You can be someone." Not, "You used to be someone." You are. Present tense. right now." Frank felt tears he hadn't cried in a decade pushing against his eyes. "I don't know how to be that person," he said. Margaret handed him a clean rag, something to hold, something to do with his shaking hands. "Start simple," she said. "Tomorrow, when you come here, I want you to do one thing different." "What?" "Walk up to my door, knock, and when I answer, look me in the eyes and say, 'Good morning, Margaret.'" Frank stared. "That's it?" "That's everything," Margaret said. "The mind uplifted raises the body, Frank. But it starts with the eyes." The next morning, Frank woke on his corner at 4:47 a.m. Heart pounding. A simple task. Walk to the door. Knock. Look up. Say good morning. Why did it feel like climbing Everest? He lay there, watching the sky lighten from black to gray to pale blue. The street slowly came alive. Cars, joggers, early workers. At 6:15, the bakery lights turned on. Frank stood, brushed off his jacket, walked the 12 feet to the door. His hand rose, paused, dropped. "Come on. Just knock." His hand rose again, knocked. 3 times. The door opened. Margaret stood there, surprised, pleased. "Frank," and he did it. Lifted his chin, found her eyes, held them. "Good morning, Margaret." His voice was steady. His eyes didn't drop. For 5 seconds, they just stood there. 2 humans, eye to eye. Then Margaret's face broke into a smile. "Good morning, Frank. Come in. Coffee's ready." He stepped inside the bakery. The first time in 9 years he'd entered through the front door of any building. It felt like walking into church. Over the next weeks, Margaret gave him more challenges. Today, when customers come in, say hello to them. Today, count your change out loud when I pay you. Today, tell me one story about your life before the street. Each task felt impossible. Each task was simple. Each task rebuilt something. The hardest was the day Margaret handed him an old work shirt, blue with a name tag pocket. "I want you to wear this tomorrow," she said. Frank took it like it was made of glass. "Why?" "Because people who work here wear uniforms, and you work here." I'm just helping out, Frank." She was firm now. "You've been here 6 weeks. You're reliable. You're skilled. You're employed. Stop arguing with reality." That night, Frank sat in the shelter with the shirt folded on his lap. A uniform, a name tag pocket, symbol of what? Belonging? Identity? He slept with it under his pillow. The next morning, he put it on, buttoned it carefully. The fabric was clean, crisp against his skin. When he walked up to the bakery, Margaret was already outside, sweeping. She saw him, stopped. Her eyes welled up. "Look at you," she said softly. Frank looked down at himself. Blue shirt. Clean pants he'd bought from Goodwill. Shaved face. He looked like a man with a job. "How do you feel?" Margaret asked. Frank thought about it, really thought. "I feel seen," he finally said. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning in March. A storm hit Cleveland, rain horizontal, wind howling, streets flooding within minutes. Frank was inside the bakery, helping prep for the morning rush, when water started seeping under the front door. "Oh no!" Margaret moved toward the storage room where flour bags sat directly on the floor. Frank was already moving. Grabbed bags, lifted them to high shelves, stacked boxes, shoved towels against door cracks. The water came faster. Margaret slipped on the wet floor. Frank caught her, one arm steady around her shoulders. "I got you," he said. They worked together for an hour, soaking wet, laughing and cursing, building sandbag barriers from flour sacks, protecting the ovens, saving inventory. When the rain finally slowed, they both collapsed against the counter, breathing hard, drenched. Margaret looked at him. "You just saved my bakery." "We saved it," Frank corrected. "No." She shook her head. "Frank, look at what you just did. You didn't hesitate. You didn't ask permission. You just knew what to do. You took charge." Frank blinked. She was right. He'd just acted like someone competent, like someone who belonged there. "Because I used to," he started. "No," Margaret interrupted. "Not used to. Still do. That man isn't dead, Frank. He was just looking at the ground so long he forgot he was standing." And suddenly, Frank understood. All these weeks, Margaret hadn't been giving him dignity. She'd been reminding him it was already there. Under the dirt. Under the shame. Under the years of looking down. Dignity wasn't earned or granted. It was remembered. "The mind uplifted raises the body," Margaret said softly, echoing her own words from weeks ago. "You've been lifting your mind, Frank, inch by inch. And look," she gestured at him, "your body followed." Frank looked down at his hands, hands that had just worked, saved, built, protected. The same hands that had laid bricks 30 years ago. The same hands that had begged for coins 5 months ago. Just hands. Capable hands. His hands. "I thought I'd lost myself," Frank said, voice breaking. "I thought the man I was had died, and all that was left was trash." "You believed you were trash," Margaret corrected gently. "And belief is powerful. It bent your spine, dropped your eyes, made you small." She touched his shoulder. "But belief works both ways. You started believing you could look up. So you did. You started believing you could work. So you did. You started believing you were Frank. So you are." Tears streamed down his face now. Not sad tears. Something else. Release. Recognition. "I'm still here," he whispered. "You were always here," Margaret said. "You just had to lift your head high enough to see it." 3 months later, Frank did something extraordinary. He signed a lease. Not for much. A single room in a boarding house, shared bathroom down the hall. But it had a door with a lock, a window with a view, a bed that wasn't concrete. His first night there, he sat on the mattress and cried. Not from sadness, from arrival. He'd made it back to walls, back to shelter, back to home. At the bakery, he worked mornings now, official employee, legal paycheck, name tag that read Frank since 2024. Margaret had asked him what year to put. He'd thought about it and said, "This year." That's when Frank started. Customers knew him now. Regulars called him by name. Kids asked him to lift heavy bags because Frank's super strong. One morning, a young man walked in, dirty, eyes down, asking for work in exchange for food. Frank recognized that posture, that shame, that invisibility. Margaret looked at Frank. Frank looked at the young man. "What's your name?" Frank asked. The young man hesitated. "Miguel." "Miguel," Frank repeated, making it real, making it matter. "You want coffee first? Then we'll talk about work." Miguel's eyes lifted, just for a second, surprised to be called by name. Frank smiled. He knew that surprise. Had felt it 4 months ago. "The mind uplifted raises the body," Frank said quietly, pouring coffee. "But it starts with someone remembering you're still here." A year later, Margaret decided to retire, sell the bakery. She didn't tell Frank until the papers were signed. Didn't want him to worry. On her last day, she handed him an envelope. Inside, a letter and a key. "Frank, when I met you, you were sitting on my sidewalk. convinced you were nothing. You taught me something I'd forgotten. Dignity isn't given, it's remembered. You remembered yours. You helped Miguel remember his. I'm leaving, but the corner stays. Your corner. Thank you for showing me that every piece of ground can be holy if someone stands on it with their head up. Margaret Frank read it twice, folded it carefully. The new bakery owners kept him on, asked him to stay, said Margaret had recommended him as essential. Now, when Frank sweeps that corner of Pine Street, the same corner where he'd slept for 9 years, he does it standing tall. Sometimes people still drop coins near his feet. He doesn't pick them up. Instead, he points to the bakery door and says, "Hot coffee inside, and work if you need it." The corner that once held his lowest moment now holds his greatest truth. You can fall on the ground. You can sleep on the ground. You can lose everything down to the ground. But you can't rise from the ground until you lift your eyes from it. Frank didn't leave the street because of a miracle. He left because someone called him by name. Because someone saw him when he couldn't see himself. Because someone believed his dignity was still there, just buried under years of looking down. Sometimes God doesn't rescue us from where we fell. Sometimes God sends someone who remembers our name, who sees us on the ground, and instead of lifting us up, simply reminds us, your head can still rise. The mind uplifted raises the body. But first, someone has to remind you, you're still here. This story reminds us that dignity isn't something we earn or lose. It's something we remember. Frank didn't need a miracle. He needed someone to call him by name, to see him when he couldn't see himself. And that changed everything. What part of yourself have you been looking away from? What would change if you lifted your eyes today? If this story touched something deep in you, write the word dignity in the comments. Let me know you stayed until the end. Share what city you're watching from. Subscribe and hit the bell because every week I share stories that can transform how you see yourself and your struggles. Click the card on screen for another powerful transformation story. And remember, your head can still rise.